Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu News Analysis. Before we begin today's discussion, we would like to remind you that we are offering one-on-one counseling for UPSC aspirants. If you guys want to know how to prepare for the exam, you can get in touch with our counselors. All you have to do is share your details in the Google form, for which the link is provided in the pinned comment below and also in the description box below. Just share your details and our counselors will get in touch with you. So with this, let's begin with the discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the daily edition, I have chosen 8 important articles. 2 of these articles deserve a detailed, comprehensive discussion. We have 6 more articles that are relevant for the prelims examination. So let's cover these topics one by one. And if you guys are benefiting from the initiative, do support us by pressing the like button, share these videos with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's take a look at the first topic from page number 8. We have a very important column that deals with the topic of remission. The topic is very relevant for Indian polity. So let's understand the concept of remission and why this topic is in news. See, there was a very disturbing development with regard to the Bilkis Bano case. In the Bilkis Bano case, the convicts who had been held guilty of committing gang rape and murder, they had been prematurely released by the government of Gujarat. This incident, which occurred some time ago, had shocked the nation, and recently the Supreme Court has taken corrective steps by reversing the remission of these convicts. The Supreme Court has said that the government of Gujarat has misused the powers of remission and it has derailed justice, and as a result it has ordered the convicts to be arrested and thrown back in jail to serve the punishment that they were delivered in this horrific case. So let's take a brief look at what is the Bilkis Bano case. Even though the case itself is not relevant for the exam, the background is very essential to understand the concept of remission. Let's take a brief look at the timeline of this case. What did the Supreme Court observe, and then discuss the concept of remission. The Bilkis Bano case dates back to the year 2002, and this was a crime, a horrific crime that occurred in the midst of the Godhra riots in Gujarat. The Godhra train burning incident had triggered communal tensions in Gujarat that led to large-scale riots, and an extremist mob at a place known as Randikpur had attacked several communities in the region, and Bilkis Bano, who was a pregnant woman at that point, was gang raped, and 14 of her family members were brutally killed and burnt. This case was initially brushed aside by the local police. When Bilkis Bano, with the help of local community members, when they approached the local police, they failed to register the case as well. Even after the case was registered, they failed to acknowledge that rape had been committed. And even in the post-mortem, in the autopsy, a lot of mistakes were done by the local police, including the local doctors, and every attempt was made to brush aside the case and to cover up the case. Eventually, Bilkis Bano, with the help of legal activists, civil society activists, took up the case to the higher levels and ensured that this case was transferred out of Gujarat. As there appeared to be some kind of support from the police and legal system in the Gujarat government to derail the case was shifted out of Gujarat under the directions of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court later handed over the case to the CBI for a transparent investigation, and even the trial of the case would be later transferred to the jurisdiction of Maharashtra, because the trial which went on in Gujarat also appeared to be conducted in a biased manner. The Supreme Court, which took note of these adverse developments, transferred the trial itself to Maharashtra, to the jurisdiction of the Bombay High Court. So the prosecution was taken away from Gujarat government and the Gujarat High Court, and it was transferred to the Maharashtra government and the Bombay High Court. Eventually, these convicts, they were held guilty of the offense. They were delivered life imprisonment. But a lower court had actually convicted only 11 of the accused. The rest had been released due to some lack of evidence. But later, the Bombay High Court reversed the judgment. It upheld the life imprisonment of those who were convicted, but the others who were let off, even they were convicted by the Bombay High Court and they were delivered the strictest of punishment. The police officers, the doctors who were all responsible for trying to cover up the case, they were all charged and punished and convicted, thus marking a major development in this case. So, this case is already dragged for more than 2 decades. As we discussed, the convicts were held guilty. Even the government officials who had colluded, even they were punished. But recently something horrific happened. Some of these convicts, they had approached the Supreme Court citing that they were eligible for remission. So they presented certain arguments in front of the Supreme Court and obtained a favorable order from the Supreme Court itself, which directed the Gujarat government to look at their remission case. Immediately, the Gujarat government set up a committee as per the existing rules of remission, and these convicts were granted remission. They were released from custody, and their release was celebrated and welcomed by several local leaders and politicians, and this shocked the nation. That people who were involved in communal riots, in a gang rape and brutal murder incident, they were being celebrated. So this incident that took place recently had shocked the nation, and now the Supreme Court of India has stepped in again, and it has quashed the decision of Gujarat government to grant remission to these convicts. The Supreme Court has said that the Gujarat government misused the powers of remission. The Supreme Court has criticized the convicts as well for misleading an earlier bench of the Supreme Court to grant a favorable order which would suit their interests. So given the timeline of this case and given the implication of this particular case, it's important to understand what is remission, what exactly is remission, what are the rules governing remission in the country. See, if you look at prison and prison rules, this is essentially a state subject, meaning state governments have full jurisdiction over management of prisons and prisoners. So every state would have set out its own prison rules, and under the prison rules, states do provide a provision for remission of sentence. Remission of sentence is nothing but basically a reduction of the jail term, a reduction of the sentence which has been awarded by the court. Why is this done? This is done because the convicts would have already spent few months or few years in jail before the actual punishment is delivered to them. Correct? So that is something which is accounted for. Essentially, the jail term they've already spent is often offset with the final punishment which is delivered. So this is where remission matters, where the actual sentence can be reduced by certain days, months or years. And also, in a democratic setup, justice is based on the principle of reformative, rehabilitative justice. In a civilized democracy, in a modern civilized democracy, we don't seek retributive justice. We don't seek to simply take revenge against the convicts, right? The justice system is not designed to take retribution against those who are guilty of crime. Rather, the justice system is designed to provide for rehabilitation and reformation of the guilty accused. Essentially, jail is a place where the convicts not only serve their punishment, but it is a place for their reformation. It is a place for rehabilitating the prisoners and giving an opportunity, a humane opportunity to them to transform themselves. So if they display good behavior in jail, if they take part in various reformative, rehabilitative activities planned with the prison authorities, then on a case-to-case basis, they will become eligible for few remission days, which can be offset against the punishment which has been given to them. Let's say, hypothetically, in a particular case, a convict has been punished with 10 years of jail, 10 years of imprisonment. This convict would have already spent maybe 3-4 years in jail when the case was still going on. The court itself would have offset that punishment, meaning the convict will spend 7 more years in jail. But in jail, if the convict behaves well, if he or she shows an inclination towards reforming themselves, if they proactively take part in all the reformative activities at jail and display good behavior, then the state government has the authority to consider their remission on a case-to-case basis. The convict can file an application stating that they have earned these many remission days because of their good conduct in prison. Depending on the state rules regarding remission and the guidelines that have been laid out by the Supreme Court, the committee which is constituted will look at the case on an individual level and accordingly it might grant remission. So those remission days which has been earned could be offset from the punishment. So let's say the convict has earned a remission of, let's say, 5 years through their good conduct, through their good behavior, and also there exist certain factors which match the Supreme Court guidelines. So if all these conditions are met, if these criteria are met, then the committee constituted by the state government can grant remission to the prisoner. So those, let's say, 5 years of remission can be offset against the punishment, and if they've already served it, they can be released from jail as well. So remission is a concept rooted in reformative justice, rehabilitative justice. Because in a civilized democracy, we don't believe in retributive punishment or in taking revenge against the guilty. But however, the policy of remission, if it is not well defined, if the rules are not clear, it can be misused to derail justice. We have seen this happening in several cases, particularly in the Bilkis Bano case. Now see, you take a horrific crime like rape or murder, where life imprisonment has been awarded. In case of life convicts, to be eligible for remission, they have to serve a minimum sentence of 14 years in jail. Before 14 years, they can't get out of jail. They can't ask for remission. But if a life convict serves minimum of 14 years in jail, then they can apply for remission. They become eligible for remission. They submit an application to the prison authorities, to the state government as per existing rules. State government will set up a committee and it will look at the case individually. So depending on the rules of the state, the prison rules and the Supreme Court guidelines, the committee will decide whether the remission should be granted or not. So this is where the problem arises. See, the Supreme Court of India in the Lakshman Naskar case of 2000 had identified the various factors and guidelines to be considered while granting remission. What are these guidelines? The Supreme Court had said that the state level committee should consider various factors before granting remission. For example, will the crime committed by this criminal, what kind of impact did it have on the society at large? Is it a gruesome, horrific crime which can never be pardoned? Or is it something that can be pardoned at a later point? What impact did the crime have on the society at large? This becomes a critical factor. Next, is there a chance of this criminal committing the crime again if they are released from jail? This is a critical factor. Next, whether the convict has lost their potentiality in committing crime. Does the criminal have the ability to commit the crime anymore? Let's say the criminal is already 80 years old. It's highly unlikely that he or she would go and again commit the crime. So the potentiality of the convict to commit the crime again is also a factor. Then even the socio-economic condition of the convict's family. What if the convict is the sole breadwinner of the family and they have served the minimum jail sentence? So on these grounds, they can be granted remission. The committee will also consider whether any purpose is being served in keeping the convict in jail. So these factors were identified by the Supreme Court to bring some transparency in the process of remission. These guidelines were laid out in the Lakshman Naskar case of 2000. But as you can see, all these guidelines are highly subjective, meaning it will vary from case to case, from criminal to criminal. So in each case, a lot of discretion is applied at the state level, at the level of the state government. Even after a criminal has been held guilty and punished, at the level of the state government, where the committee is set up, a committee is constituted by the state government to look at the remission application. These committee members enjoy a lot of discretionary power. This is where arbitrariness could creep into the process. See, if it was a fair process, then there would be no issues with the process of remission, as it promotes reformation and rehabilitation of the criminal. The problem arises because at the state level, there is a lot of scope for misuse of this provision. Because the state government will solely decide who will be the members of the committee. It can even include political members, political leaders. And there are no checks and balances. There is no transparency in the manner in which the committee will function. The committee has full discretion because the nature of these cases, they are very subjective. It varies from case to case, criminal to criminal. By citing some of these factors, the committee can always grant remission, thus leading to arbitrary exercise of power. This is a classic case of misuse of power at the state level, even after the courts, the higher courts, have punished the accused. So this is the concern that comes up with regard to remission. There is unchecked discretion that has been provided to the state governments. Even though there are certain guidelines, the subjectivity involved in each case could give rise to the discretion which could be easily misused. And once remission is granted, there is judicial review. You can appeal against the order of remission. Let's say the state level committee has granted remission and ordered the release of the convicts. Now the victim, who's still fighting for justice, can approach the court again for a judicial review. But however, there are guidelines again. These guidelines were laid down by the Supreme Court in the Epuru Sudhakar versus State of Andhra Pradesh case in 2006. According to these guidelines, if the Supreme Court has to consider the judicial review application, then there are certain criteria to be met. What are the criteria? The victim, who is now appealing against the order of remission, has to show that the committee did not apply its mind while deciding upon the case of remission, that the existing laws, rules were defied, the rules processes were not followed, there was non-application of mind by the committee members. This has to be established even to accept the judicial review petition. It has to be either proven that relevant materials were not considered before granting remission to the convicts, or it should be proven that there was a malified intention, a deliberate malified wrong intention to release the convicts, to derail justice, or there was clear case of arbitrariness. This has to be established by the victim. Only then the court will take up the orders of remission for a judicial review. So this becomes a loophole in the criminal justice system, which could be misused by powerful convicts who have political influence. What if they take the help of local political leaders, influence the state government, and set up a biased committee which rules in their favor? Since there is a lot of discretion, arbitrariness involved, the committee might grant remission, and then the victim, even if they want a judicial review, it's very hard because there are conditions that exist to allow the Supreme Court to consider a judicial review in such cases. So these are the concerns being highlighted by the writer. There is very little scope to challenge them on these grounds. Even though judicial review is available, it's difficult to prove malified intention, to prove that there was arbitrariness, to prove that they didn't apply the mind, the committee members did not apply their mind while granting remission. Now, for example, in the Bilkis Bano case, when the state committee in Gujarat granted remission, you'll believe it or not, if you look at the remission orders of all the 11 convicts, it is exactly the same. The remission order passed by the committee set up by the Gujarat government, it is exactly the same word to word for all the 11 convicts. Remember, I just told you, the remission process is subjective. It varies from case to case and criminal to criminal. Because each criminal circumstances are different. His or her socio-economic circumstances, their ability to commit crime again, the nature of crime they had committed, right? These factors vary from person to person. So how can the orders be the same in every case file? If you look at the release orders, the final remission orders that were issued by the state government, the orders are exactly the same in every case. Clearly shows that there was non-application of mind. There was arbitrariness exercised at the state level, most likely with a malified intention to release the convicts. So this is what the Supreme Court has pointed out. In the latest ruling, it's honestly a historic intervention with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court stepped in and it has pointed out the flaws in this remission process that was followed by the Gujarat government. First of all, the Supreme Court has observed that the convicts, they misused the Supreme Court's jurisdiction because the previous bench that they had appealed to, right, they did not give them all the material evidence. The convicts, they presented a very biased argument and obtained a favorable judgment in their favor, and this had led an earlier bench of Supreme Court to ask the concerned government to take up the remission case. So this became a legal basis for them to approach the Gujarat government and seek their remission. But this, according to the Supreme Court, was a misuse of Supreme Court orders. Because the earlier bench of the Supreme Court was misled by the convicts. They had committed a fraud by not presenting all the evidence in the case. And more importantly, in this particular case, remission cannot be granted by Gujarat government. Gujarat government has no locus standi. Why? Because the case was eventually tried in Maharashtra under the jurisdiction of Maharashtra government and Bombay High Court. So, if remission has to be granted to these convicts, that power lies only with the government of Maharashtra, not with the government of Gujarat. This was another derailment of the process. Is that clear? The Supreme Court has clearly pointed this out and it has ordered the convicts to be brought back into jail. So that is why I said this is a historic intervention with the Supreme Court in delivering justice, that too in such grave, serious offences. First of all, the convicts had committed a fraud on the Supreme Court itself by misleading an earlier bench to get a favorable judgment in their favor. This earlier bench had ordered the concerned government to take up the case of remission. Right? The earlier bench was not presented with all the facts. So they used this order to approach the Gujarat government, file an application for remission. And a committee was also set up which largely consisted of local political leaders who are very close to the convicts. So obviously they used their discretion to grant remission and release these convicts. So this is where a fraud was committed and the legal process was violated as well, because in the Union of India versus V. Sriharan case of 2015, a constitution bench of Supreme Court had clearly said that when it comes to remission, only the legitimate authority has the power to grant remission. Meaning where the case has been tried, only that particular state has the power to grant remission. Now in Bilkis Bano case, the case trial took place in Maharashtra. It was transferred out of Gujarat. Right? So only government of Maharashtra has the power to set up a committee and grant remission, not the government of Gujarat. The Supreme Court said the Gujarat government has usurped this power from the Maharashtra government. That's why this order is not valid. So the Supreme Court has turned around this order and finally delivered justice again to Bilkis Bano. Is that clear? So this is where you should understand the concept of remission. Why do we have this provision in our criminal justice system? What purpose does it serve? What guidelines, factors govern the process of remission and how this could be misused? Is that clear? So now, let's move on to the next important column from page number 9. In this article, the writer is examining why international law matters. This could be a great topic for international relations. Possible mains question can come in GS paper 2. This could also be a possible essay topic as well. So let's understand why international law is relevant, why international law is crucial in international relations. The premise of the article is that in today's world, it appears that international law has been undermined. Because in the last 2 years itself, we have seen various incidents and events that shakes our faith in a rules-based order. See, we all believe that the international order, which is created under the UN, the international order followed in international relations, we feel that there is a set of rules, a set of laws that applies for everyone, that guides various countries and governments to behave in an appropriate manner, to promote peace and stability, to ensure injustice is not done or human right violations is not committed. Right? We believe that there is a rules-based order that defines a set of standards, and we believe that everyone should abide by it, and we also have a presumption that if someone breaks those rules, they'll be punished, they'll be held accountable for it. But sometimes we see such incidents which shakes our faith in international law. We have seen countries getting aggressive unnecessarily. Take, for example, the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The Russian invasion of Ukraine was a clear breakdown of international law because the UN Charter prohibits the use of force. UN Charter prohibits the violation of sovereignty, integrity of a nation in such an illegal manner. Look at Israel's alleged human rights violations in Gaza, in the ongoing Gaza war. More than 23,000 Palestinians have been killed as Israel fights Hamas. While Israel might justify its war against Hamas, there is no justification for killing of civilians on such a large scale. Same with Russia as well. Russia has justified its aggression against Ukraine and the large-scale violations it has committed in Ukraine. You can see this with China as well, especially in South China Sea. Then even with India, for example, with regard to our border dispute, China frequently breaks down international law and it disrupts the rules-based order. Even Western countries are no less, especially the United States, also has a habit of breaking certain international rules whenever it is convenient for the US. Whenever it's looking to push its own national interests, its own geopolitical interests, even Western countries don't hesitate to break international rules. So this has given rise to an assumption of late that international law is dead. There is no international order anymore. Many experts have said that we have seen the death of international law with the Russian war against Ukraine and the Israeli violations against Palestinians. In fact, Thomas Frank, a very popular thinker, had called the death of international law back in 1950s itself, almost 50 years ago. He had said that international rules-based order is already dead because the UN Security Council is ineffective to enforce these laws. Now, if you look at the UN Charter, which is the constitution of the UN, under Article 2, Clause 4, countries are prohibited from using force against each other. Kindly make a note of this provision. It's very important. Article 2, Clause 4 of UN Charter states that countries are prohibited from using force against another country, meaning they can't violate the sovereignty, integrity of another nation without a valid reason. This is prohibited. So, when such a provision is codified and if it is accepted by all UN member states, we assume that there will be compliance. We assume that every country will comply with this guideline, with this international law. And we also assume that if someone violates this, if someone breaks this down, they are going to be held accountable. Right? This is what gives us faith in the international legal system. Right? In the international institutions as well. The same goes with our domestic setup as well. We have faith in the constitution, in the law of the land, in the government, in the judiciary, that if someone breaks the law, if they don't comply with the laws, right, if they violate them, we have a faith that they will be punished, they'll be held accountable for it. This is what keeps the whole system together. But today, experts are they're pronouncing the death of international law. They're saying that international law is dead because Israel is going unchecked with regard to its large-scale violations against Palestinians. Russia is going unchecked with regard to its violations against Ukraine. This is the argument of one set of thinkers and experts. But the writer of the column says that even though Russia and Israel, for example, have undermined international law, it is wrong to assume that international law is dead. China might be breaking down international rules. Western countries might also be doing the same. But however, international law still matters. Even though it's not effective, even though the violating countries are not held accountable and punished, even though the laws are not enforced, it still matters because it provides for stability. That is the core argument being made by the writer. See, Thomas Frank had said that international law is dead almost 5 decades ago because the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council, they would obviously not cooperate with each other in all the matters. They would play their own geopolitics and misuse their powers at the UNSC. This was very evident. See, here the flaw with the structure of the UN was that it was presumed that the permanent members will cooperate with each other, will work together even after the Second World War. It was presumed that these 5 countries which had the permanent membership of UNSC, which enjoyed the veto power, it was assumed that they will cooperate with each other to uphold the principles of UN Charter. This was unlikely to happen because that is not how real world geopolitics works. Countries will develop differences, they'll be in different power blocks, and they will not really care about enforcing these international principles and laws. They will rather use them to serve their own self-interest, their own national interests. This was very evident. That's why Thomas Frank declared that international law is dead. But however, this argument might be true to an extent. Still, international law matters. International rules, they still matter. However ineffective it is still very, very critical because without any rules, we are going to be worse off in that situation. Without any kind of international order, we will be in a worse off situation. Now imagine, in what kind of world would you like to be in? A world where there are no rules at all, no international rules, where international law is declared as dead? Or a world where at least there is a semblance of rules and balance, where there are some institutions, some international laws having at least some kind of impact, some kind of effect in keeping countries under check. Right? It's like choosing the better out of the worst options. Writer says that international law, yes, it's not ideal. The existing institutions like UN, the structures like UN, they're not effective. They can't ensure compliance. They can't enforce these laws. They don't have the authority. There is no global police force to enforce the international laws. But however, without them, we would be in a worse off situation because then there will be no restrictions, no obligations at all. And imagine what several countries might do, what dictators, authoritarian leaders might do. So international law is still relevant. It still matters, even if it is being violated, even if it is being undermined and broken down. Now, why am I stressing on this point? Because see, UPSC might ask you, given these developments around the world, can we assume that international law is useless? Can we assume international law is ineffective? Yes, the answer is yes, international law has been undermined. But to assume that it is dead, that it is entirely ineffective, is also a mistake. It's a grave mistake, in fact. Because international law still has a kind of impact that keeps countries under check. It does provide for balance, for structure, and creates an order that provides some semblance of stability in the world. Now see, this is where we need to look at compliance and accountability. As I was mentioning, whenever there is a rule, the rule is useless unless and until someone is following it, meaning there should be compliance, they should comply with the rules. And if someone is violating those rules, they should be held accountable. They should be punished. Correct? That is when the system will work. Now, in this case of international law, we expect national governments to adopt international rules and laws into their domestic laws, or we expect national governments to bring out policies which abide with international laws. Correct? For example, we have UN Convention on Law of the Sea, which covers all maritime issues, including maritime jurisdiction. Countries would have adopted certain laws and policies based on that. Then we have international conventions related to human rights with regard to diplomatic relations, right? They are all adopted into national laws and policies by the concerned national government. That is how they are complying with it. They are following those international rules and laws. Apart from that, apart from governments adopting it, apart from laws being passed by the parliament, the judiciary in every country internalizes the international norms as well. While looking at certain cases, the judiciary, the higher judiciary especially, gives a wider interpretation by adopting international norms and principles into domestic law. For example, the Supreme Court of India has done it. In several important cases, when there are no sufficient laws and guidelines within the Indian context, in the Indian legal system, Supreme Court has relied on international precedents. It has drawn on examples and principles from international law while passing rulings in India. So this also has an effect on the government. It holds the government accountable in some way or the other. There may not be an international police system. The international legal system may not be effective in enforcing the law, but domestically it will have an impact because in many unseen ways it will get internalized. When there is a system of rules, even if most powerful countries are not being punished, still invoking international law, asking those questions, brings international pressure on the violators. For example, right now Russia has been hit with sanctions by a set of countries. On what basis are they imposing sanctions? It's on the basis that Russia has violated international law. Without any respect for international law, then the sanctions will have no validity at all. Of course, these sanctions against Russia are not through the UN. It's not entirely legal as per international law. Western countries are selectively imposing their sanctions. But still, Western sanctions have a set of legitimacy because Russia indeed has broken international law. In a way, Western countries are exercising pressure on Russia because we have a rules-based system. Without any rules, Western countries would have no basis to pressurize Russia. Now take for example South Africa, which has filed a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. South Africa has accused Israel of committing a genocide, of violating the UN Genocide Convention, and has taken Israel to the ICJ, to the International Court of Justice. This ruling may not have any effect on Israel. Even if ICJ asked Israel to end the war, Israel will not follow it. Even though ICJ rulings are actually enforceable, they are binding, a country like Israel will obviously reject it and it will do what it wants. But still, the very fact that South Africa has brought up the issue and taken the case to ICJ brings pressure on Israel. It creates international pressure on Israel. So international law still matters because it gets internalized into the domestic processes. Even though it's not complied entirely, even though there is no enforceability and accountability, it still creates pressure. It provides for a system of checks and balances in the international system. That is where the validity of international law lies, according to the writer. Yes, they are not ideal, they are not perfect, but they at least have an effect. They at least help the domestic countries within the country at the domestic level, right? The people, the citizens, various institutions to question their government. You can use international law as a basis to question your government, to question the decision makers and the decisions they are taking. Internationally, others can question the violators. Even if there is no punishment, even if it can't be enforced, right? At least they can raise those questions and bring pressure through various institutions and diplomatic channels. So that is where the relevance of international law lies, according to the writer. Is that clear? So now, let's head towards the prelim section and take a quick look at the smaller articles in today's newspaper. On page number 1, we have an article referring to the National Clean Air Program. According to this article, majority of cities in India are suffering from extensive air pollution. See, the government of India had launched a very ambitious program called National Clean Air Program, NCAP. It was launched in 2019 by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And the primary goal was to reduce particulate matter accumulation in more than 130 cities in India. Is that clear? Around 131 cities are part of this program, and it is mainly designed to combat air pollution. So along with the Environment Ministry, the Central Pollution Control Board, the State Pollution Control Boards, they also play a critical role in implementing this program. So the goal of this program was to cut the concentration of PM, particulate matter, that is PM10 and PM2.5, which are considered as the most dangerous pollutants. Particulate matter, which is essentially an aerosol. It's released through combustion of fossil fuels essentially, right? By vehicles, industries, by burning of agricultural waste, etc. The particulate matter is extremely hazardous for human health because when you inhale the PM particles, this is what clogs your respiratory system, leading to various respiratory disorders. It has a direct impact on human health and life expectancy as well, right? So the goal of the program was to tackle air pollution by primarily focusing on particulate matter, and the goal was to achieve a reduction in PM levels. The target was to reduce PM concentration by 20% in 5 years, that is by 2024, as compared to 2017 levels. This was the goal of the program. It was launched in 2019 for a period of 5 years with the goal of reducing PM concentration by 20%. Now the goal has been revised as well. The target year also has been revised. The target year has been pushed to 2026. It's been pushed by 2 more years, and the goal is to reduce PM concentration by 40%, 20 to 40%. 20% in some cities, 40% in some cities, and more than 130 cities are being the target of this program. They are under focus. But according to a recent survey, a recent study, the program is not yielding the desired results. Be it major metro cities like Delhi or even tier 2, tier 3 cities, they're all suffering from high levels of air pollution, and the PM levels have not really declined as per the goals laid out under the National Clean Air Program. Understood? So this program works closely with the Air Quality Index and the National Clean Ambient Air Quality Standards. Right? The Central Pollution Control Board, along with the State Pollution Control Boards, has implemented an air quality index to monitor the air quality levels and track various pollutant levels. This goes hand in hand with the National Clean Air Program. So please make a note of these key points related to such important government schemes. Next, on page number 3, we have an article related to a very important art form known as Yakshagana. I have taken an image instead of the article, but if you open page number 3, there you can see an article referring to Yakshagana, which is an art form, a traditional art form that is seen in coastal Karnataka, particularly in Dakshina Kannada. In the Dakshina Kannada region that stretches from Udupi to Mangalore, right? And it extends towards the Malabar coast as well, towards Kerala. So in this whole belt, in the coastal belt of Karnataka and Kerala, there are these traditional art forms, theatre forms which are practiced. One of them is Yakshagana, which is specific. It's native to coastal Karnataka, to Dakshina Kannada. It is a temple art. It's associated with local temples and temple rituals. And in this art form, in this theatre form, there is dance, there is singing, and there is music. It includes all the three: dance, music, songs, etc. And the performers, as you can see in the image, They are vibrantly dressed. They wear very vibrant clothes. There is a very exotic headgear that they wore. And it also includes extensive makeup. There is elaborate facial makeup along with the massive headgear, ornaments and the costumes that they wear. This is all integral to the art form. That is what makes Yakshagana so visually appealing. The other art forms related to it are Bhutakolla, which was popularized by the Kannada movie Kantara. Then related traditions, the Theyyam in Kerala. All these are related traditions and art forms. So Yakshagana is one native temple art form specific to coastal Karnataka, and the stories they narrate are largely based on Hindu mythology. They are drawn from Puranas, Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. And traditionally, it was a male-dominated art form. Only men used to perform Yakshagana, and they would perform the female roles as well. But in modern times, this is changing. Of late, in the last few decades, even women take up Yakshagana. Even they are part of Yakshagana troops. Is that clear? These are some key points you have to note down regarding this exotic, beautiful art form that originates from Dakshina Kannada. Next, on page number 4, we have an article referring to Article 30 of the Indian Constitution. What does Article 30 deal with? It's one of the fundamental rights. It's under Part 3, which deals with fundamental rights, and it is related to freedom of religion. As you know, Article 25 to Article 30 deals with freedom of religion, and Article 30 specifically provides a constitutional right for minorities to establish educational institutions. Is that clear? Both religious and even linguistic minorities. Religious minorities in India and linguistic minorities in the country. They both have a constitutional right, a fundamental right to establish and administer educational institutions in the country. The state should not discriminate against them in any way. The state is prohibited from discriminating against such institutions. Rather, it should support and encourage them. Is that clear? Now, there was a particular case in front of the Supreme Court which was challenging some of the provisions of Article 30. A constitution bench of the Supreme Court was looking into it. It was a 7-judge bench headed by Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud. And the question in front of the constitution bench was that, what if there is a minority institution not run by minority members? In the management of that educational institution, what if there are members from other community? Does it still enjoy constitutional protection? What if this educational institution, which is calling itself a minority institution, what if it is set up through a law? What if there is a separate law which is provided for its establishment, meaning there is a statute? There is a statute providing for its creation. Then, does that institution still enjoy the constitutional protection? This was the question in front of the Supreme Court. The case is particularly related to Aligarh Muslim University. Aligarh Muslim University, established through the Aligarh Muslim University Act of 1920, it has a statutory backing. There's a statute governing the functioning of Aligarh Muslim University. At the same time, it enjoys constitutional protection under Article 30 as it's deemed as a minority institution. So petitioners had challenged this, whether the institution should enjoy constitutional status, minority status, as it is established by a statute, by a separate law. And the governing body may not have members entirely from the minority community. There could be members from other communities as well. So these questions were raised because in 1967, the Supreme Court had ruled in the Aziz Basha case. It had laid down certain guidelines for identifying religious and linguistic minority institutions. So now the Supreme Court has said, it's passed a very important ruling. The Supreme Court has said that the constitutional guarantee under Article 30 will apply to minority institutions, irrespective of whether it is set up through a law or whether the administration, the management is secular. Meaning, let's say in the management of this institution, there are members of other community, from other religion, from other linguistic groups. That does not undermine the value of the minority institution. Minority institutions serve a critical purpose. They are the backbone of the education system. along with the government schools and private schools, minority institutions play a critical role in the education system of the country. And also don't be under the assumption that minority institutions admit only students from minority groups. No, that is not the case. Students from any group can join minority institutions as well. And it's not just religious courses or language specific courses which are delivered here, right? So given this fact, the Supreme Court has said, even if it is set up under a law, it will still enjoy constitutional protection. Even if the management has secular members from other communities, from other religions, from other linguistic groups, still it will enjoy constitutional protection. Is that clear? So Article 30's validity essentially has been further upheld by the Supreme Court by protecting religious and linguistic minority institutions. Next, on page number 6, we have an article according to which the Department of Telecom has ordered the blockage of thousands of websites every year by invoking a certain provision under the IT Act. The Information Technology Act of 2000. This is the law that governs electronic commerce in the country. All electronic digital transactions in the country is governed under the IT Act. Essentially information technology, that is computers, then IT and IT related services, the internet, cyber crimes, everything is governed, regulated under the IT Act. So Department of Telecom, under the Telecom Ministry, has the authority to block certain specific URLs. Certain websites, web links can be blocked by invoking a certain provision under IT Act, which is Section 69A of the IT Act. According to a RTI response provided by the Telecom Department, thousands of websites have been blocked by the ministry. It sends a directive to internet service providers, that is ISPs, and even content delivery networks like AWS, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Akamai, Cloudflare, all these IT firms, they offer content delivery networks. That is where large part of the internet-based content is getting delivered to your phones and devices. Then you have your internet gateways, the service providers, the telecom and internet service providers. They form the back end of the internet infrastructure, right? So if certain websites are objectionable, posing a certain threat, violating a certain provision of IT Act, then the Telecom Department has the authority to issue blocking orders, and the orders have to be complied by the ISPs and CDNs and all the other stakeholders in blocking those websites. You can see here in this graph how thousands of websites have been blocked over the years. There was a peak hit in 2020, and as of 23, as of last year, almost 7,000, close to 7,000 websites were blocked by the Telecom Department. Now, what is this section that provides this power? Please understand this. Section 69A of the IT Act. It's under this section that the Union government has the authority to block online content, to block certain websites, if there are certain grounds provided under it, if it is threatening the interest of India's sovereignty and integrity. Meaning, if there is a threat to India's sovereignty and integrity by a certain website, it can be blocked. If there is a threat to the defense and security of the state. Next, if India's friendly ties with a foreign country is under threat. If the website poses a threat to India's friendly relations, it can be blocked. If it poses a threat to public order, to law and order. If a particular online page, if it is leading to incitement of violence, if it is promoting the commission of any cognizable offense, right? If it is trying to incite hatred, trying to promote communal divisions or social divisions leading to possible law and order situation, even such content can be blocked. So please make a note of this. It's very, very important. So under section 69A, if there are violations of these factors provided here, then the government can order the blocking of these websites. Coming to Article 7, it refers to the case that South Africa has brought up against Israel. As we were discussing in the previous article, South Africa has dragged Israel to the International Court of Justice, also called the UN Court, and it has filed a case against Israel for violating the UN Genocide Convention. South Africa is accusing Israel of committing a genocide against Palestinians, as the Israel war in Gaza has killed more than 23,000 Palestinians. South Africa's allegation is that Israel is not abiding by the UN Genocide Convention. And since both South Africa and Israel are parties to this convention, South Africa has a right to file a case at ICJ calling for its full interpretation to prevent a genocide in Gaza. That is South Africa's allegation, which has been rejected by Israel. So here there are 2 points to understand. One, the Genocide Convention itself, the UN Genocide Convention. When was it adopted? What does it deal with? Next, ICJ. What is ICJ? What are its powers? Let's go through this quickly. The Genocide Convention was brought into force in 1951 after the Second World War. It was inspired by the Holocaust, where Jews were slaughtered across Europe by Nazi Germany. The policies of Adolf Hitler under Nazi Germany led to the extermination of millions of Jews across Europe. Right? Following this horrific incident of human rights violation, following the Second World War, a UN convention was adopted to prevent such acts. And these acts were treated as criminal acts, and it was called a genocide. The term genocide was first coined by Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin. He was the first to use the word genocide and give it a legal definition. This was later adopted by the UN as well, right, following the Jewish Holocaust and as well as the Armenian genocide in Armenia. Following these repeat incidents during the World War period, genocide was declared as an international crime and adopted by all UN member states. So what is a genocide? Essentially, a genocide is an act where an entire community is sought to be destroyed. A community on national lines, a community belonging to a particular country, a particular nationality, or a community of a particular ethnic group, a particular racial group or a religious group. If an entire community is targeted, especially with state support, and if there is a clear attempt to kill the members, to cause physical harm and mental harm to them and to wipe out and exterminate them on a mass scale, if lakhs and millions are being slaughtered, that is being labeled as genocide under the convention. Targeted killing on these lines, on nationalistic, ethnic, racial, religious lines. This is called an act of genocide. This is an international crime punishable under international law. This has been adopted by International Criminal Court as well through the Rome Statute. It can be seen as an international crime. All right. And it can be brought up at International Court of Justice as well, at the ICJ, which is the UN court. So countries which are accused of committing a genocide, which are accused of targeting a whole community on these lines, right? They could be brought up and charged at ICC and ICJ. Now, what exactly is ICJ? Why is it called UN court? It is called the UN court because it's a principal organ of the UN. It's the judicial organ of the United Nations. It was established in 1945 through the UN Charter, which created the United Nations. The UN has various principal organs like UN General Assembly, UN Security Council. Similarly, there is ICJ, International Court of Justice. It's headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands. It is situated at the Peace Palace, which is the administrative building, and it's located at The Hague, which is the judicial capital of the world, where several international tribunals and judicial bodies are headquartered. So this is where ICJ is located as well, in Netherlands, and it has the powers to take up cases filed by UN member states. So UN members who have adopted the UN Charter, they can file cases against each other. For example, India and Pakistan have fought many cases at ICJ. Pakistan had accused India of breaching the Indus Water Treaty. India won all those cases. Recently, in the case of Kulbhushan Jadhav, an Indian national who has been given the death penalty in Pakistan, India approached ICJ to get a stay order on the execution of Kulbhushan Jadhav. Right? So such interstate disputes where violation of UN laws and international law is pointed out, in such cases, the ICJ can be approached by the UN member states. Now, South Africa has approached ICJ because Both Israel and South Africa are signatories to Genocide Convention and both are UN member states. So South Africa has said that Israel is violating the convention. Is that clear? Then even other UN bodies can approach ICJ, like UNESCO, for example, UNICEF, UN Environment Program, all these other organs of UN, specialized agencies, programs of UN, if they want advisory opinion, if they want legal advice, even they can approach ICJ. But individuals can't file cases. Private companies can't file cases here. Like you and me, we can't approach ICJ. ICJ will not take up those cases. Private organizations, NGOs can't approach ICJ. Only the governments, only UN member governments can approach ICJ to file case against another country. Alright, only to settle interstate disputes. UN groups, bodies and organizations can also approach ICJ for advisory opinion, for legal advice. This is the role of ICJ. Now I'll give you one small exercise. Read about the composition of ICJ and the election process of the judges. Please read about this and mention those points in the comments. That's a small homework for you. Please understand how many judges are present in ICJ. That is the composition. Understand the election process, how they are elected. Right? So make a summary of that and mention that in the comments below. Now coming to the last article for today, on page number 12, we have an article referring to the recent elections in Bhutan. See, we studied in a previous session that 2024 is an election year, the biggest election year of all time. More than 60 countries are going for elections. Bangladesh already went through its controversial elections. Sheikh Hasina obviously has won, obviously because there was no opposition. Opposition parties had boycotted the election. Now Bhutan has completed the electoral process. Results will be announced officially, but the verdict is very clear that former Prime Minister Tshering Tobgay, who heads the People's Democratic Party, is clear to win the election and become the next Prime Minister. Now see, there are few points to understand here, because see, Bhutan is a very important neighbor of India. We have fantastic ties with Bhutan. Bhutan is still a monarchy. It's not a full democracy. It's not a republican state. It's a constitutional monarchy. There is a constitution, there is an elected government, there is a prime minister, there are ministers looking after the administration and governance. But it's not a full-fledged democracy or a republican state. It's still a monarchy where the king is the head of the state. The government obviously functions under the king. Now, Bhutan has not just a unique political model, right? It also has a very unique economy and a unique culture. It's a Buddhist majority nation, and it firmly believes in traditional values. It gives a lot of priority for cultural and spiritual values. Bhutan has largely kept away from industrial development, from large-scale exploitation of natural resources. It still has pristine resources in the Himalayan belt. Alright? And it does not believe in just statistical growth. It does not believe in GDP-led growth. So it has adopted something called the Gross National Happiness Index. Bhutan's growth is measured in terms of happiness, which is a mix of the economic growth happening in the country along with cultural, spiritual and environmental factors. Bhutan gives a lot of priority for environment conservation, biodiversity protection, etc. So that is why Bhutan gets a lot of appreciation. It's seen as a leader in climate change because it's a carbon neutral and carbon negative country. Instead of contributing to emissions, it's absorbing more emissions from the atmosphere, right? So Bhutan is seen as a leading voice in the world of climate change as well. But however, it is facing some serious economic challenges, especially the current generation of youth. They are not finding enough opportunities in Bhutan. Because of the lack of industrialization, there is a lack of educational opportunities and employment opportunities. There is very high unemployment in the country. Today's youth in Bhutan, right? They're largely going to other countries like India, US, Australia, Europe. They prefer these destinations to study and work. So there is a brain drain happening in Bhutan. Majority of the country's youth are leaving the country due to the lack of educational and employment opportunities. This remains a concern. And that is why Bhutan has launched a major economic initiative. It is coming up with an industrial cluster, very close to the Indian border. We have discussed this in previous sessions as well. It's a pet project of Bhutan's king. Bhutan's king has recently launched an initiative with India's help to set up a major industrial facility with better transportation and connectivity close to the Indian border. Can you please find out the name of this industrial project, the city where this project is coming up, and mention that in the comments below. Find out this Bhutanese city close to the Indian border where this industrial project is coming up, which could transform Bhutan's economy. So these are some important developments we should pick up from today's newspaper. Now take up these practice questions. It's all based on what we have studied. I expect you guys to write an answer and post them in the answer writing portal, for which the link is provided in the description box below. So this concludes my discussion for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Don't forget, we are offering one-on-one counseling for UPSC aspirants. You just have to share your details in the Google form, and the link can be found in the description box and in the comment below, in the pinned comment. So just share your details. Our counselors will get in touch with you. And also join our Telegram channel, because we have a quiz on these articles after the session ends. Again, you can find the link in the description box. And if you did like the session, do let me know in the comments. Press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.